I will introduce myself. My name is Chusa Moon, and I was the lucky one to be supported by the Freeman Grant from the Soulmate Center. And part of it is to give an outreach to the public and nurses and caregivers to inform how important our behaviors are to have optimal aging. And hopefully we can have better life for as we age too. And today we have wonderful speaker Chelsea Holland, and she is an assistant professor at the college, and her research focuses on physical activity and metabolic outcomes. She will talk in more details about her research, but today it's more towards to the general public, not too researchy. It's more of giving information about healthy physical activity and optimal aging. We all know how important physical activity is for our lives, but we are not very sure whether we're doing it in a healthier style or not. So I see people are joining. So Chelsea, why don't you introduce yourself to us and then get it started?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for the introduction so far, Chusa. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to present. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, and I love doing community outreach education. So I'm really excited to share the information I have today. Let me get my slides shared. That would be helpful. And we'll get going. Alrighty, can you all see my presentation? Cool. Okay, so today, like Dr. Moon said, I'm going to talk to y'all some about physical activity and healthy aging. So I always like to start by asking the question, what is a physically active lifestyle? Because physical activity, I think, is one of those charged terms where sometimes people have a very specific image in mind. And when we're talking about living an active lifestyle, I think it's really important to recognize that this really looks different for everyone. What we all have in common, though, about living a physically active lifestyle is that we want to move our bodies more and we want to spend less time sitting or lying down. Some of the activities that we might do as a part of our active lifestyle are things that are planned. And this is something you might think of like exercise, like going for a walk every day or joining a class at a gym. Other activities might be unplanned. So these are the things that we do threaded throughout our lives that we might not always recognize as living a physically active lifestyle, but which might be incredibly impactful in terms of bringing up the amount of activity we do. And a really great example I have of this is just simply parking further away at the grocery store. So not parking in those spots maybe that are as close, but trying to park a little bit further away, or taking an extra lap up an aisle in a grocery store are great examples. Most importantly, though, it's really important that we find a variety of activities that you really enjoy doing. Living an active lifestyle should be something that's sustainable. It should be something that brings joy to your life, and it should be something that promotes your overall health and well-being. So to kind of prime this presentation, I'd like to talk a little bit about how our bodies change as our age, specifically within the context of physical activity. And here I'm going to talk a little bit about our musculoskeletal system. So our bones and the muscle tissue and the things that, are really impacted by physical activity and really impact our ability to maintain physical function as we age. And first, thinking about our muscle tissue. At a very small level, our muscles are made up of little fibers. And as we age, those little fibers actually lose the ability to respond as quickly. So those movements that at a younger age we may have been really responsive and easy to do as we age, it's just normally going to become slower. Further, as we age, we have more fat deposits within our muscle tissue. This starts happening at about around age 35 and can contribute to the amount of muscle and our strength and our muscle tone. And overall, what these two things have in general is that our muscle tissue becomes more vulnerable and slower to recover to injuries as we age. Next, we have our cartilage. So cartilage is the cushion between our bones. And normally our cartilage is this nice kind of gelatinous or fluid type structure. And as we age, we start to lose some of that cushion. We start to lose some of that hydration and gelatinous between our bones. And then additionally, we have calcium deposits that accumulate between our bones. And this is what we think of a lot when people talk about having osteoarthritis. This is the primer for developing our osteoarthritis. Next, we have our ligaments and tendons. So ligaments connect bone to bone. Tendons connect muscle to bone. What's important to think about this is over time they get stiff, and what this results in is joint stiffness. If we think about the things that are connecting the top of our arm to the bottom, and if they're getting stiff over time, it's going to make it less comfortable. It's going to make it a little bit more difficult to go through that range of motion of extending and flexing our arm. And lastly, we have our bone mineral density. So there's lots of changes with aging, especially in women postmenopausal, that can impact our bone mineral density. So when we think about our bones, they're made up of kind of a neat network. It's called a trabecular network. That's kind of this little crisscross of fibers within the bone tissue. We like for that to be nice and dense. However, as we age, that density becomes reduced. That increases our risk for pathological fractures. So those are things like fractures that happen when they shouldn't be, like for example, someone who stands up and has a hip fracture. It also increases our risk for all fractures. So thinking about someone who, in the context of today, maybe slides on some ice and they land on their arm and they end up with a humerus fracture, they would be at a higher risk than someone who has better bone mineral density. So overall, all of these things combined with other health outcomes put people at a higher risk for becoming frail or having frailty. And this is a progressive physiologic decline that increases people's risk for poor health outcomes as they age. So thinking a little bit about those different specific topics, it's really important to understand that a lot of the things I just mentioned can be really preventable with physical activity as we age. So osteoarthritis, maintaining good range of motion, maintaining good hydration while we're active, keeping our joints mobile and limber, and having good muscle surrounding our joints are really important to help prevent osteoarthritis, as well as just manage osteoarthritis that people might have from, say, a pre-existing injury. Physical activity also reduces the risk of sarcopenia. So, sarcopenia is something that occurs as we age. It's a result of a gradual loss of muscle mass, strength, and physical function. It's highly correlated with frailty and is highly correlated with our ability to maintain our functional capacity. And functional capacity is really important. I'll talk more about it on the next slide, actually. But it's really important because it's really what helps us maintain our health span and it's what keeps us going in our day-to-day life. Osteoporosis, I previously mentioned, is something that we're concerned about. So, doing higher impact exercises as people can tolerate, doing resistance training, doing strength training, all help promote bone remodeling or bone turnover. So, that crisscross network that's the structure within our bone tissue, when we do any weight bearing exercises, like even just walking or carrying a gallon of milk, that puts stress on our bones and it causes our bone tissue to remodel or to turn over. And that helps increase the amount of bone tissue we have long term, reduces the risk of osteoporosis and fractures. And lastly, we have falls. We know about a third of people over the age of 65 have a fall each year. And falls really can be reduced by maintaining a physically active lifestyle. So, having good muscle strength, maintaining our reflexes, so maintaining the quickness that we can respond, maintaining our feeling for things and maintaining things like perception with depth and balance, as well as having good mobility can help reduce fall risk. And we do this through balance, flexibility, and resistance training. When we do maintain a physically active lifestyle, we've seen reductions in fall risk by as much as 23% in people as they age. So that brings me to, we talked some about really musculoskeletal system focused, and now I want to talk some about the whole person and why it's really important to maintain an active lifestyle as we age. So at the base, at the ground point is functional mobility. And maintaining our functional mobility, maintaining our ability to get around and do the things that we want to do in our day-to-day life are really critical for aging and are critical to people's quality of life and well-being as they age. Maintaining a physically active lifestyle is going to help people maintain their functional mobility. Further, there's impacts in terms of pain management. So we know that about 2/3 of people over the age of 65 report some type of pain with things like osteoarthritis, fibromyalgia, back pain, neuropathies, issues with arterial blood flow and claudication. By maintaining a physically active lifestyle, we can help to manage those symptoms. And we also see correlations with other things like sleep and with mood, which kind of have a cyclical response with pain overall. In terms of sleep, we know that being physically active, there are immediate impacts, which Dr. Moon gave a wonderful presentation about sleep back in the spring. But overall, thinking about it in the big context, we might see immediate improvements in sleep by maintaining a physically active lifestyle. And then we're also going to see that correlated kind of cyclical relationship with when people sleep better, they feel better, they have less pain, they have better well-being overall. In terms of cognition and memory, physical activity can immediately improve things like memory and cognition. And then when we think about long-term benefits, we know that people who increase even small amounts of physical activity, so walking in their day-to-day life, have overall improvements of cognition, memory, and they see reductions in the risk for dementia. Physical activity is thought to be one of the greatest risk factors for dementias and Alzheimer's disease. So by maintaining an active lifestyle, we're reducing that risk. And then lastly, I'd like to talk about mental health and well-being together. So mental health really refers to our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, how we feel, how we act, how we can maintain and handle stress in our day-to-day lives, how we relate to other people, how we make the choices in our life. So, having good mental health is really a lot more than the absence of what might be considered a mental illness. It's really a state of balance. It has to do with how we cope with challenges in our life, how we maintain fulfilling relationships with people around us, and how we engage in productive activities. By prioritizing well being and maintaining a physically active lifestyle in support of that well being, we're really helping to prioritize our overall health and our quality of life. So I've talked some about short-term benefits and overall benefits, and I do want to briefly touch on what are the long-term benefits of living a physically active lifestyle. And when I put this slide together, initially I put the things on here, and then when I was really looking at it, I realized I have 4 to 5 of the top 5 causes of death listed on this slide for people. So it reduces the risk of a lot of the top 5, causes of death for people in the United States. So we see reductions in the risk for cardiovascular disease, and that also includes cerebral vascular disease. We have a reduced risk for developing diabetes, dementias, as well as cancers. Kind of on the flip side, while it reduces the risk for these things for individuals who are impacted by them, physical activity is one of the primary forms of self-management for many of these chronic health problems. I specifically look at diabetes self-management, and physical activity is one of the cornerstones in terms of diabetes self-management, as well as self-management of cardiovascular disease. So we see improvements in outcomes across a wide range of chronic diseases that hundreds of millions of Americans and people in the United States are living with. So this was a really nice flyer that I came across when I was putting this together, and I thought it's from the CDC. I thought it nicely represented that there are both immediate and long-term benefits of maintaining a physically active lifestyle. So when we think about the immediate benefits, this is what we're going to experience right after we do something. So a single bout of a moderate to vigorous physical activity provides immediate benefits to our health, and it can be about as short as 10 minutes. So we can see improvements in sleep quality, reduced feelings of anxiety, and even reductions in blood pressure. On the long-term spectrum, this means that we're being physically active, we're doing these behaviors repetitively over a longer period of time. We see a wide range of reductions in those risks for chronic diseases that I just mentioned. We see reductions in the risk for dementia as well as depression, improvements in heart health by lowering that risk of heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes, lowering the risk for cancer with 8 specific cancers listed. We also see that it helps people to maintain a healthy weight, helps people live independently more longer. So thinking about that health span, the concept of we've done a really great job in medicine of increasing our lifespan, but we also want to increase the number of healthy years that we're living functionally. So maintaining independence, maintaining a long time of functional living, improving our bone strength as well as improving balance. So now that we know about some of the benefits, let's talk about how prevalent inactivity is, because it sounds really great. Like Dr. Moon said, we know a lot about the benefits, but we also know that a lot of people aren't incredibly active. So about 28% of United States adults age 50 and over are considered to be physically inactive. When we look at rural populations, that number can go down even further. With some of the literature I've looked at, it goes down as far as like 23%. And then when we think about people who have chronic diseases, we see that number go down even further. So thinking about the fact that 85 to 90% of people age 65 and older have at least one chronic disease. And looking at this image here, you can see that these are the percentages for the amount of physical activity people are getting. The green boxes are people who have no chronic disease. The blue boxes are people living with one or more chronic disease. We can tell that the people with the blue boxes are a lot more physically inactive than people with the green boxes. Additionally, we do see disparities in physical activity and physical inactivity between different racial and ethnic groups, as well as people living with a lower educational level. So overall, I think this really highlights that, um, physical activity is a really important topic for us to touch on. It's something for us to think about, um, and it's really important for us to consider increasing. So let's go ahead and talk about the different types of activities. There's a few different ways to categorize activities. I don't know that the categories are as important to memorize as it is to understand that there's just different types of activities, and we want to try to touch on all of them. I thought these were some nice graphics to represent this. So the first are lifestyle or day-to-day activities. And again, these are activities that we do in our day-to-day lives. They're not typically things that are planned. And these include things like walking instead of driving if possible, parking further away from a store entrance as possible, taking stairs instead of an elevator, maybe moving around more while we're talking on the phone, or gardening or playing with grandkids. These are things that really cross several different categories of activity, but they're things that we do in our day-to-day lives, and they're small changes we can make. Next, we have our little running person. These are our aerobic activities, and sometimes these are called endurance activities. These types of activities use the large muscles of our body over and over. And when we do this, our body uses more oxygen and it increases our heart rate. This is really especially helpful when we think about controlling our blood sugar and improving our heart health. The little weight here represents doing resistance activities, and these are activities that we do to actually strengthen our muscles. The weights we lift could be traditional weights, like something that you would imagine in a gym setting, or these could be common household items, like an unopened can of soup, bottles of water, or even a gallon of milk. Resistance bands are another great option that we consider when we think about this. Next, we have balance training. So balance training is going to really target the muscles of our chest and our core, and it's going to help to reduce our risk of falling. And lastly, we have flexibility. Flexibility activities help to stretch our muscles. They help to keep our joints mobile and to keep us moving. If you haven't been active in a long time, stretching is a really great place to start. It can be as simple as slowly stretching your arms above your head, or more structured through things like yoga and Pilates. So that brings us to thinking a little bit about how much activity should I be doing? How did I know how we were classifying people as physically inactive? How do we actually know these things? So what's recommended? So cross-cutting a lot of different organizations, American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association, the World Health Organization, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, there's a really strong consensus about how much activity we recommend for people to get each week. And these are kind of our goals. So first we have aerobic activity, where we want people to aim for either moderate intensity or vigorous intensity activity. And when we think about these different intensities, moderate intensity activity, if I think about a 10-point scale, with 0 being doing no activity at all, and 10 being working as hard as I possibly can, moderate intensity activity would mean that you're doing something that rates about a 5 or a 6. It's something that's going to make you breathe a little bit harder, your heart's going to beat a little bit faster, but you can still talk and carry on a conversation. You just might not be able to sing the song words to your favorite song. So we want people to try to get about 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity a week. Or we can think about vigorous intensity activity. So on that same scale, vigorous intensity means you would be rating yourself about a 7 or an 8. This is going to increase your heart rate quite a bit. It's going to make it hard to breathe. You're probably not going to be able to talk more than in short, like words or portions of a sentence if you're trying to talk during this. With this, you can see the recommended amount is less because it's a greater intensity. It's more effort on the level of the person. So when we think about this, everyone's fitness level is different. So this means that walking might feel like moderate intensity activity to one person, and it might feel like vigorous intensity activity to another person. It all really depends on you and what you're comfortable with doing and your current health condition. So when we think about the different levels of activity, it's really important to think about the fact that this is personalized to you, this is personalized to your goals, and what's really safe and comfortable for you to achieve. Next, we have resistance training. Again, these are repetitive motions that are going to help to actually improve our muscle strength. We want to do resistance training of all of our major muscle groups at least 2 times per week. And when we say 2 times per week, we also want it to be done on non-consecutive days. So what that means is maybe I do it on a Monday and a Thursday of the week, not a Monday and a Tuesday of a week. And then lastly, we have balance flexibility training again. There's no specific recommended amount of balance and flexibility training. Other than that, we just want to do it. Oftentimes, the activities we're doing for aerobic activity and resistance training holistically incorporate balance and flexibility training already. So that's just something to consider. So what could this actually look like? What it might look like is doing 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity. So maybe I walk 30 minutes a day, 5 times a week. And then I do some type of resistance training 2 days a week. So maybe I do weight-based exercises. I do some push-ups or squats or exercises in a chair even. And then I do some balance training and some flexibility training. Or it could look like doing 75 minutes of more intense aerobic activity. Or it could look like doing a mix of both. Maybe I got 10 minutes of really intense activity, and now I need less of that moderate intensity aerobic activity. So again, it can look different. There's no set prescribed way of doing this. It's really what fits with your lifestyle. So with this slide, kind of what's the most important thing to think about? I think sometimes when we think about those recommendations, it feels very prescriptive. What's the most important thing to think about is that getting any physical activity at all is better than none, and it's going to benefit your health. So I think it can be really important and interesting to keep those guidelines in mind and understand where organizations' recommendations are coming from. But at the same time, I think it's really important to remember that if we get any activity of all, it's better than nothing. So let's all start now. Um, so let's take a second and stretch out our upper back and our shoulders. So if you're comfortable doing so seated, feel free. Otherwise, feel free to stand. But you can go ahead and stretch. I'm going to start with my right arm. I'm going to stretch my right arm across my chest and gently hold it across my chest for about the next 10 seconds. When we do this type of stretching, you want to try to do it in kind of a fluid movement. You want to avoid jerking or kind of pulling really hard when stretching. Once you feel like you have a good stretch, don't push it so far it's painful. And then we can go ahead and switch to the other side. With doing this type of stretching, we could increase it up to 30 seconds once we felt more comfortable. And we would want to do this about 2 to 4 times each side. So this is a really great example of how to just simply get started with stretching or take a break in your day. Now feel free to continue stretching and moving about as you would like. I'm going to keep presenting. So over the next few slides, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the specific types of activities and kind of some strategies and opportunities we might have to meet those different types of activities. So first we have aerobic activities. We talked some about the different in moderate and vigorous intensity, and we talked about the recommended time. There's a lot of different ways we can achieve aerobic activities in our day-to-day life. Probably one of the easiest is just simply walking. It's free. It's often something that's very accessible to people, either to do inside of their home or outside of their home. But there are a lot of other fun ways to engage in aerobic activities. Walking is also relatively low impact compared to other things like jogging or running. So it might be a good place to start. We can also think about swimming. If we have access to a pool or a public recreation center, swimming is a really wonderful low impact aerobic exercise. Can feel really great on sore joints and sore muscles. We can also consider cycling or using exercise bikes, dancing, which is both an aerobic activity and a social activity a lot of times, thinking about stair climbing or even doing yard work. Again, we want to try to get 30 minutes of aerobic activity each day on about 5 days a week, but starting out as low as 10 minutes can have a really great impact on our health. In addition to those aerobic activities, we need to do things to strengthen our muscles at least 2 days a week. And when we think about resistance activities, these are doing repetitive motions with our muscles, either through body weight or weighted, to the point where our muscles feel tired. When we do this, determining how much you need to do really just depends on what you feel comfortable with, and we can do it a variety of ways. Like I mentioned, we can have resistance that's simply our body weight. This can be something as simple as getting up and down, getting from a seated to a standing position in a chair without using our arms for any support. That's a really great body weight exercise for our legs and our hips, as well as our core, so our abdomen and our back. If comfortable, we can also do different types of supported push-ups. So think about if we don't feel like we can do a push-up on the floor, think about leaning up against a wall and still using your body weight as the resistance to do that push-up. There's things like resistance bands that are available. They're typically not very expensive, but they're a type of rubber band that are either a whole circle or just a long band that you can hold on to and use to create different levels of resistance. This is another really great starting point. These are also really wonderful to use when trying to stretch. And then, as Dr. Moon is demonstrating, there are handheld weights and different types of weights. So there's handheld weights that can be purchased, and then there's also different types of weights if someone's interested in going to like a public gym. There's larger weights, there's cable weight systems, there's a lot of opportunities. Overall, we want to think about using our major muscle groups. So doing exercises that impact our legs and our hips, our abdomen and our back, and our chest, arm, and shoulders 2 days a week. And there's a lot of different ways to achieve this. You can be creative, you can be as creative as you want or as non-creative. But there's a lot of ways to achieve this and a lot of opportunities. Next, we have balance training. So balance training, again, it's really important to help prevent falls. It helps to strengthen our back, abdominal, and leg muscles. And some different types of balance training. A great place to start that's typically relatively safe is to do either heel toe walking or sit to stands. So heel toe walking is walking with your feet right in front of each other like this. Sit to stands involves sitting in a chair and standing up without the support of the chair. So avoiding using the arms of the chair when we're standing. Another opportunity, like in this picture, would be standing on one leg. So being sure there's something around for support, like a wall or a table or a chair, something that's not going to move. You wouldn't want to use a chair with wheels, but using that to help provide some support and then raising one of your legs up and standing there and balancing for 30 seconds. More challenging could be using a wobble board. This is a type of board that kind of moves back and forth when you stand on it. And then there's also opportunities for group training. Things like yoga and Tai Chi can help with flexibility. They can help with resistance training, and they're also a way to improve our balance. And then lastly, we have flexibility training. So flexibility training is stretching. We did this a few minutes ago as a group. So this is going to help to promote and maintain joint mobility. It's going to help to promote and maintain muscle elasticity. It's going to help reduce the risk for injuries. Opportunities are things like just gentle stretching of different muscle groups. When we think about this too, we don't have to sit down and do like a long stretching routine. We can stretch out our shoulders and our neck in the morning, and then maybe after we've had our coffee, we want to do some other stretches on our lower body. It doesn't always all have to be done at one time in one bout or one setting. So that brings us to thinking about bringing it all back together. How can we holistically incorporate activity in our day-to-day life? Some questions I kind of challenge you to think about are first, what fits in your day-to-day life? Oftentimes, when we think about being more active, I think we think about making these big lifestyle changes that may not always be as sustainable as starting out with things that are smaller, that are fitting within your day-to-day life. And then also thinking about what you like to do. If going to a group aerobics class in a gym sounds like the worst possible thing to do, don't do it. Find something else that works for you. Find something, maybe brisk walking is better. Maybe you really enjoy water aerobics. Maybe you really enjoy gardening. That's a great opportunity to get in some resistance training. So just think about what you like to do and think about how we can strategize just doing a little bit more of it in our day-to-day lives. Thinking about some other strategies. So we've talked about types of activities. We've talked about why we should do it. The last few slides I'm going to talk about are how we can do it. So first off, let's talk about where to get started and how we can set some goals and have a plan to be more active. So first things first, I say don't get overwhelmed. Remember, any activity is better than none. There's no right or way to be more active, and it's all a journey that we all have to find our own way about what works the best for us. Simply starting and making a small change in one area can have a really big impact in our health and in our overall lifestyle. Oftentimes, like I said, people feel like they need to make a really big change. They need to make a complex plan. And sometimes that can be not sustainable. After our initial motivation and excitement for that change wears off, then sometimes it can be really hard to keep doing that really complicated plan. So instead, find something that you enjoy and progressively make small changes. Over time, you'll find you're making a lot of progress towards your goals and you're living a more active lifestyle. If you haven't been active in a while, it's always great to start out small and progressively work your way up and consider what you're safe and comfortable doing. So, planning to stretch for 10 minutes and take a 10-minute walk or even a 15-minute walk are a really great starting place. If you've been more active and you feel comfortable, consider progressively increasing to something that works for you. To get started, I recommend setting a goal. And when we set goals, we want to be smart. We want to set goals that are specific, not vague. We want them to be measurable, meaning that we know how long, how often, how much of that activity we're going to do. We want it to be attainable. So we want it to be something that's challenging. It's more than what we're currently doing, but we don't want it to be so out of reach that it becomes unmotivating and it doesn't feel like we're ever going to get there. With that, we want it to be realistic. So, again, realistic to our current situation, what we can do, and we want it to be time bound, meaning we can probably do it in about the next week. So, here's a few examples I'd come up with. I'd said I'll walk for 10 minutes in the morning, 3 days a week in my neighborhood. I'll walk around my house during TV commercials every night, or I'll walk through every aisle of the grocery store when I go to Aldi on Tuesday. So these seem like really small things. They don't take a lot of time. They don't take a lot of change to my lifestyle. It's really interweaving it within things that I'm already doing in my day-to-day life. Then we want to make a plan. So once we've set a goal, we just need to put a little bit of thought into how we're going to achieve that goal. So the first thing you want to do is think about what do you need to do to meet that goal? Do you need to create a reminder on your phone? Do you need to look at your schedule and see when does it actually work for me to do this thing? Next, we want to think about what happens if something comes up. We all have busy lives, we all have complex schedules, things happen. So, putting a little bit of thought and strategy into how I can be flexible with my activity can help us maintain that physical activity behavior. So, an example could be if I plan to take a 30-minute walk during my lunch break at work every day. Maybe I have a really busy day and I just can't fit in that 30 minutes. So maybe then I choose to do 15 minutes on my lunch break and 15 minutes in the evening when I get home. Next, you want to think about who can help you stay on track. So, who's someone that's supportive that you could share this information with, and who might provide some positive reinforcement and just be someone that you can talk to about your journey. And then lastly, consider how are you going to celebrate your progress in a healthy way? So celebration doesn't have to be monetary, it doesn't have to be anything big, but how are you going to recognize yourself and appreciate yourself for the effort and the improvements and all of the wonderful things that you're doing by being more active? Once we have our plan, can also think about how do we know if we're reaching our goal. So you can think a little bit about tracking your activity. This can be really simple, like writing down on a calendar that's on a magnet on your refrigerator when you walk. It could be putting a note in your phone. If you're more interested in more tracking and data, there's wearables available that can provide additional information about our activity. And then you want to compare what you did with your goal. So sit down for a few minutes and think about, okay, I'd set a goal that I want to walk for 15 minutes, 3 days a week around the lake with my dog in my neighborhood. And I was able to do it 4 days a week. So maybe next week I want to set a goal to go for 20 minutes, 4 days a week, and kind of make a little bit of a progressive increase. That way I keep making progress towards my overall goals. All righty, and to kind of wrap up, the last thing is enjoy adding more movement to your life. That's probably the most important thing is we want to do things that we enjoy. We want to do things that add to our quality of life, and we want to do things that help us to be more social and enjoy our day-to-day lives. All righty, and I will thank you all, and I have some quick resources, and I'll open up for any questions. I'm gonna quit sharing too.
Yeah, awesome presentation. Thanks, Chelsea. I was
Thanks.
able to stand up in my office and did some
Yay.
stretching with you, so it was super helpful. Um, I have a question. My mother-in-law recently had a knee surgery, so
Mhm.
she is not like able to walk as much as she could. Do you
Yeah.
have any recommendations for someone like her, just
Yeah.
bound in the sofa for a
Yeah,
longer period of
absolutely.
time?
So
Yes, like seems like walking is the best way to achieve our goals, but would there be any exercise that we can do while we're sitting?
absolutely. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
there are a lot of opportunities for us to do a variety of exercise while seated. So
Mm-hmm.
after knee surgery, I'm sure she's also hopefully working with physical therapy to get
Mm-hmm.
back range of
Yes.
motion.
Uh-huh.
So we wouldn't want to push things too far. But an
Yes.
opportunity would be to simply do like leg raises while sitting in a chair or sitting on the
Uh-huh.
sofa, as much
Uh-huh.
as tolerated and within the range of
Uh-huh.
motion tolerated. So what
Uh-huh.
that means, I'm going to scoot back. If you can see me, would be just
Yes.
simply doing leg raises while seated.
Oh,
So
that's
that can
helpful.
be an
Uh-huh.
opportunity for aerobic activity. It can also
Uh-huh.
be some resistance activity.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it would depend on range of motion, and
Yes.
it might
Yes.
be a time to not to rest that knee for a while in
Oh.
recovery. But
Mm-hmm.
as far as for the rest of the body, there's a lot of different opportunities with seated. We can still do our resistance training in our upper
Mm-hmm.
body while seated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So thinking about doing, upper arm movements while
Mm-hmm.
seated,
Mm-hmm.
could be good opportunities. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a great question.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments for Chelsea?
I was just going to say I loved it, Chelsea. Thank you
Thanks.
very much. Great job. I especially liked you mentioning going extra laps in the grocery store because hanging on to that
Yeah.
basket makes such a difference in fear of fall and different
Yeah.
aspects of physical activity. So thank you. That was perfect.
Yeah. Thank you. No, and I think that's from some research work I've done in this. I think it's really important when we think about what are things people do in their day-to-day life and what are places people feel safe and activities people feel safe doing, and just thinking about how we can make little tweaks to that. And before we know it, we're increasing our activity quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the small ways that we could increase our activities.
Yeah.
And thanks for providing some examples that provide like kind of like was thought provoking and thinking of
Yeah.
like what I can do to increase. And I guess for me, maybe just standing up while I'm working
Yes.
could be helpful. And thanks for incorporating like actual stretching and physical activity within your talk so that we can
Yeah. And yeah,
incorporate
that's
while you're talking about physical activity.
Yeah, thinking about what many of us do for jobs, we sit a lot at our jobs, and that's something I appreciate. The standing desk, there's walking pads available. I have one at home. I haven't brought it here yet, but that's another
Yeah.
opportunity too while at work to get some steps in.
Yeah, I think the physical activity might be different in people who are living in warmer places and
Yeah.
colder places. Um, do you know any difference between those two places or any statistics or any like geographically?
Yes, there are lots of geographical differences.
Uh-huh.
Mainly, I think in two areas. One is in the types of activities people do. So in
Mm-hmm.
areas that are warmer year round, people do tend to do more activities outside. And
Mm-hmm.
people also tend to do more activities that fit with the environment that they're in. So activity
Mm-hmm.
might look different than here. We're
Mm-hmm.
probably not going to hear about people swimming a lot in the winter here, especially outdoors,
Uh-huh.
or being parts of large walking groups outdoors in the winter here in Iowa. So there are differences, I think, in the types of activities, but I think that's where strategy can be really important in terms of thinking about what can I do inside of my home potentially, or what can I do in a public recreation space? So, are there schools in my area that have a track that I could walk on for free? Is there a community wellness center I could go to? This might also have aspects of social interaction that some people may or may not like, but it could be an opportunity for socialization. And then also thinking about things like malls and other public spaces. I actually, in Iowa here, I walk at the mall a lot in the winter because it's a pretty big area, it's open, and there's actually a lot of people who go around and walk, and it's a safe place to be.
Sorry, I'm keep asking questions.
You're
If
okay.
nobody asks, I wanted your research involves kind of comparing rural versus urban areas on
Yeah,
those physical activities.
yeah,
Can you tell us about more resources around the rural Iowa or
yeah,
rural in area general in the United States to
yeah.
improve our physical activity?
Absolutely. So in rural areas, there's typically fewer resources. So less opportunities to go to things like malls, less opportunities to go to a
Yes,
community center or a gym. So
yes.
again, thinking about what resources are available, many rural communities do have a high school with a
Mm,
gymnasium or with
mhm,
a track that might be available to the public. But
mhm,
then it also does come down to thinking about what we can do for free, thinking about what we can do in our homes. Many rural areas do have public parks as well that could be good in the warmer months, potentially not in the cooler months. So going to public areas like that. But thinking about strategies of what we can do within our homes, I think are especially important depending on people's interest in traveling to go somewhere.
mhm,
So things that we can do for free in our homes. Can we use resistance bands? They're inexpensive, they're easy to store, and they would provide an opportunity for us to get some more activity in a home-based setting if we didn't want to leave.
mhm, mhm. Those are good
Yeah.
resources. I hope everybody knows that. Chelsea, you have a lot to work on to improve our physical activity in both urban and rural areas.
Yeah.
Do anybody have any other burning questions to Dr. Holland?
Thank you
Yeah.
for your presentation. Um, I purchased a set of resistant bands,
Yeah.
gosh, probably 6 months ago, and they have made great residence on the shelf in my kitchen.
Yeah.
So you've encouraged me to even bring them into the office and do that a few times a day. So
Yeah.
I will do that. Thank you.
No problem.
Maybe a little bit off, but that's never stopped me before. So recently, I have a friend that was becoming more, I would say, frail
Hmm.
and deconditioned. And yet there was nothing physically wrong with her as far as an ailment, but she was just found herself sitting more and more and more
Hmm.
all day long. And so she got physical therapy started through Medicare, and they came to her home. And over time, she began to realize that no, there was nothing physically wrong with her. She was deconditioned. And then
Yeah.
having physical therapy come out more routinely every 2 weeks just to keep her going and not forgetting was critical. I was wondering
Yeah.
if you had advice for other folks on how to get involved with physical therapy, just to get people perhaps started on this road to physical activity when it can seem so overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the pathway to physical therapy is typically through a primary care provider referral. But I do know that some public gyms do have physical activity resources. Like the North Dodge Athletic Center here in Iowa City has a a physical therapy office located within it. So it might be looking for community resources that are typically gyms affiliated with physical activity centers, or depending on payment resources, potentially going to a primary care provider. Because typically, if individuals are experiencing deconditioning and they are experiencing kind of some of that sarcopenia and frailty type symptoms, people do qualify for physical therapy resources. Um, Whether or not they can come into the home or not would depend on their transportation and ability to travel. But those would be two good starting points I would think of in terms of thinking about physical therapy.
Very nice.
Thank
Thank you for Tracy for a really good
Yeah.
question. Yeah. Do you guys have any other questions for Dr. Holland? Yeah, maybe for me, I would like to reach out to further expanded audience later on.
Yeah.
Um, and then I want to advertise next presentation by Dr. Allison Chi. It will be in March. So we did our presentation regarding sleep and strategies to care Alzheimer's and dementia patients at home by Dadrian. And today was the third presentation by Dr. Holland. The next presentation will be presented by Dr. Allison Chi on using the healthy technology and aging. So hopefully we can meet again in March to discuss about different topics. And these presentations are recorded, so Sam and I will talk about reaching out to you to about like how you can access or market this presentations because these are valuable resources for everyone. Um, Anyone have any questions for me or Chelsea or Soulmate Center? So I would like to thank the Soulmate Center for funding this project to reach out to the public on different healthy tips for optimal aging. Um, and Sam for the technical support and recording these presentations. If nobody has burning questions, I would like to stop the meeting. However, I'll linger around here for any questions or concerns or suggestions or anything. All right. So hope you have nice and safe a day. The snow stopped so far, so it looks really nice outside. So I hope you stay like moving, active. All right. Bye bye, everyone.